All right, happy Sabbath. Sorry for the inconvenience. I was having trouble too with my computer, but everything is okay now. So before we start, I'd like to say a prayer. So please join me as we pray. Our dear loving Father who art in heaven, thank you so much for this opportunity that you've given us to be together again as we look into your word for an afternoon session. We invite your Holy Spirit to continue to be with us, and that you may bless us with understanding. You may bless us with the courage to think and to exert ourselves and to get to know you more through your word. I pray that you may forgive us our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness, and be with us now and forevermore. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I don't know if you can see me properly. It's a little bit dark over here. But that's okay. All right, so can we see the screen, or the glare is too much?
You know, Douglas, it still is readable. Once you get words into that area, it may be compromised a bit, but right now, no, I think we'll be able to see it fine.
Okay. All right. So, okay. I'm grateful for everybody being here today. And before I start the presentation, I'd like to share with all of you that I had a chance to go and get vaccinated this past week. And it was, it's like when the rubber meets the road. We in the movement believe that we are fighting against conspiracy theories, and we need to show courage to follow through with what we say we believe. And I've had a bad experience with the flu virus, so I was a little bit worried about myself and my health, because I was feeling so healthy. I was feeling strong. I'm not sick, and I have to go put this thing in my body and all these things that we have to deal with. And finally, when I found myself lining up, I was like, this is it. Either I turn around and run away right now, or I follow through. And I'm grateful to God that because of what we've been learning more about the knowledge about the vaccine and about the conspiracy theories and what the truth is, I thank God that he gave me the strength to go through with it. And I got vaccinated. I got my first shot, and I'm waiting for the second one. All right, so our topic today is a study that Elder Tess did a few not long ago. It's called the 3 Steps of Restoration. And it kind of hinges on what the study was for the main study today, in terms of what we're being baptized into, or what our faith is, what is it that we believe. And I found this study very helpful for me, because it kind of defined exactly what it is that we believe. So if we a few years, in August 2019, the study of equality was laid out for us as being a history that takes us from Eden to Eden. And we could conceptualize it this way, that after Eden, Eve's first sin, where her and her husband separated, and Eve went and took the fruit. So that's sin number one. So with this sin number one, the result of it was a curse. And this, as identified in this study, was the curse of sexism. Sexism. Oh man, let me see. Is the glare too much? If it's too much, I'll move it down. Hello? Anybody?
It's still good, Douglas. No.
Oh, still good. Okay, thank you. So it's the sin of sexism, and that is submission of women. And I want it to be sort of a discussion, so please feel free to interject at any given time, or you can leave a message on the chat. I'll be monitoring it as we go. The sin of sexism, or the curse is sexism, and that's submission of women. And for me, and to conceptualize it, is that the women, Eve went and ate the fruit, and as a result of that, her decision has been questioned ever since, that she cannot make a decision, she's not good to lead, she should take a subservient role and let the man who did not eat the fruit take on this role that is described as the head. And it led or opened up into all manner of patriarchy, which is surprisingly most parts of the world. And we see this submission of women right from Eden. That's what came in. That's the first curse that came in. Then we have the sin of Ham. So we have the sin of Ham. So this we will put Eve right there. In this one, let's put Ham right here. And the sin of Ham was, we know his sin is described as a curse, right? And the curse was describing what will inevitably come out as a result of his actions. And for the sin of Ham, as a result of that, the result was racism. I'll put nationalism too. They kind of go hand in hand. So at this particular point, I need some help, and I would really appreciate your, I really appreciate some participation. And we want to describe and see how chiasm, how chiasms work. Do we understand how chiasm works? Anybody? Or can you try and describe the way you understand it?
It's like a pattern.
Sorry, say that again.
It is a pattern.
So it is a pattern, right? That's a good one. And maybe, would you say, what is the verse that you know that we can use as an example of a chiasm? A mirror. Sister Isabel says a mirror. Yes, you're right. You go to a mirror, you look at the mirror, and the mirror gives a reflection of you. But as it's giving a reflection of you, everything is on like your left hand over there is your right hand. Like if it looks like your right hand, but it's actually your left hand.
Symmetry.
Symmetry, yeah. So what is that Bible verse that we can use as an example for this study? And
one of the Sabbath.
Oh, okay, one of the Sabbath, yeah. So the way I was thinking about this study, because it's a study that has been presented, is we kind of want to dig a little bit deep into the study. So the study that was used was actually the one of the Sabbath. And in terms of the Sabbath, we have Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for
Man.
man, right? Not man for the Sabbath. So there's some principles that we see. The one that begins is the one that ends over there. And this one, the one that is over there. It's almost like a mirror. So the same thing repeated at the very beginning and at the very end. So we would assume that in the middle, the concept is the same. So here, Jesus is stating a simple fact, right? That this is a form of a structure, right? It is part of the methodology that helps us to understand complex verses. So when you understand this structure, then we're able to take this structure and we can be able to use it to understand complex structures. So it's the same thing that when we come here, we are using to say Eden. We started in Eden and we are going to end up in Eden. So when we end up in Eden, and we know that the purpose of the reform line is restoration, by the time we get here, we are going to be restored. So we start here and we are going to end up back here. So the purpose of this study, the way it was presented, was that if I was to take this line and say this is the line of restoration, we can also draw this line like this. I hope you can see. I start from here, like that. So we start from here, we go, like we're going away from God, and then God is bringing us back to Eden. So this is Eden, and this is Eden over here. And what the study, like this study is about the 3 steps to restoration. So we're saying the 3 steps to restoration, they mirror the 3 steps away from God, they mirror the 3 steps back to God. So if we say the first step, the second step, and the third step, then when we come on the other side, we'll go through the third step, the second step, and the first step. So our entire history as a human being, our entire history is working like a chiasm. There's a path away from God, and there is a path that's leading to God. So you're saying on one side, we see human beings degenerating as you're moving away from God, and on the other side, we see human beings being restored. We're being restored. So we are repeating the same steps because, as we said, it's a chiasm, it's a mirror image. So keep this in mind. Keep this in mind. I'd like to bring another concept that was in this study for us to look at, and we ask ourselves the question, why did the flood come? Why did the flood come? Anybody, why did the flood come?
The wickedness of man was great.
Sorry, can you say that again?
Because the wickedness of man was great on the earth.
Because the wickedness of man was great on the earth. So there was sin. So there was sin, and that's why the flood came. How did that sin look like? So we ask ourselves, we want to see how that sin looked like that led to God bringing the flood. God's solution to that sin is that he was going to take his children from that flood, from the sea to dry land. So he puts them in an ark, he tells them, builds an ark, and then he takes them with that ark from the sea, and he brings them to, and he takes his people from that land that they were, and from the sea to a land that they did not know before, right? And we're saying when he takes them to a land that they did not know before and they get there, the first issue that they are going to face is one of racism or nationalism. Well, we know that's when the history of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Ham did what he did. And we see that they have to deal with the issue of racism or nationalism, or like, you will serve this person, and that's where that comes in. So in this line over here, we're going up, degenerating. At what point does restoration start? At what point does restoration start? So let us pause for a second, or put a pin there, and we're going to change the question a little bit so we can start to see where restoration starts. So if we were to consider where restoration starts, and we bring in the issue of the 1260, 1,260 years of church and state, hold on one second. So 160 years of church and state. So where would we put it, that here? We'd put it right here. 100. So this, we're saying, I put this line here, and the way I understood it is, okay, from here now, this is the line of restoration. From here, this is the line of degeneration. So from the midpoint going this way, we have 1,260 years of church, that's the cross, church and state. And so we should have known that the sin that caused the flood was some type of, so the sin that caused the flood was the same sin that was observed in the 1,260 years. So I took that from the study, and I was thinking about it, and I was trying to understand what was the sin observed in the 1,260 years. So when we say 1,260 years, we are talking about God taking his people from the sea to the dry land. So that's the sea, and that's the land. And when God's people are taken from the sea to the land, when they get to the land, the first issue they're going to deal with is racism, or as you can put it, slavery. So the sin that caused the flood, would you say that it was some kind of sexual revolution that was going on? We said it was the sin of, sorry, someone mentioned, Trevor, was it you who said, like, the sin of,
The wickedness.
the wickedness of man had become great.
All the thoughts of their hearts were continuously evil.
You
So
know, the word reprobate comes to mind, because a reprobate heart, unreachable, nothing more God can do. And the reason God had to send the flood was there wasn't anything further that he would be able to do to reach that whole generation alive at that point. But it's also involving violence, like violence. They were meat eating, they were killing creatures now. They were violent towards each other. Probably murders were happening. And I'm sure racism and sexism was paramount. The macho, violent males were in the ascendancy.
So one thing we're trying to understand is that from this study was that the sin that caused the flood was the same sin that you'd have observed in the 1,260 years. So the 1,260 years, if we think about that it wasn't the idea of rampant immorality. That was their sin. Is that their sin? You know, I know that with parable methodology, we've gone away from, not gone away, we understand better when someone says that thus saith the Lord, the wickedness of man had increased and their thoughts of man were wicked continuously. That's what the Bible says. What was their sin? If I ask another question as we think about that is, what is the Protestant idea of immorality?
Sorry, Douglas, would you ask that again, please?
What is the Protestant idea of immorality?
Yeah, I thought that's what you said.
Homosexuality, like.
What's that?
Are you asking? I don't know what you're asking.
Okay, I know. My thoughts are jumbled. Yes. So the Protestant idea of immorality is
it good versus evil, good and bad, or good versus bad, or something is good versus something is not good because thus says the Lord, or the Bible says so, something to that effect.
Anything outside of God's word, including marriage, to do with all the different issues, marriage, whatever. Protestantism came to the law of God. They didn't have all of the law, but they came to the law of God and definitely stood on sola scriptura, thus saith the Lord. So immorality embraced everything that they viewed as contrary to God.
Everything that they viewed as contrary to God. I think that's the yes, please. Can you give me some time? Go ask mommy, please. Go ask mommy. Sorry. So the sin, the Protestant idea of immorality is anything that is contrary to thus saith the Lord. Right? So yeah, so what do we see in the 1,260 years? What is the sin that we observe in the 1,260 years? Because that sin that we observe in the 1,260 years is the same sin that caused the flood. I hope we understand that point, and that's what we want to understand even further. So prophetically, we are saying for the 1,260 years, they went from the sea, that's the multitudes of Europe, to the to the land, which is the United States, the lamb-like beast. And the first issue that they had to address was racism. And the path towards the restoration began at the time of the end, where God takes a people and he brings them back to himself. So let's put our thoughts together. Let me put it again together. Let me try and describe it again. What I'm saying is, we walked with God in Eden, and sin came and brought pain and degeneration to us physically, and we fell away from him. So we are restored to him. And we're saying we are restored to him, or we are going through this restoration process, and we will walk with God again in Eden. So we're going from Eden to Eden. We are going from degeneration to restoration. And what we're saying, that if that journey from degeneration to restoration works perfectly like a chiasm, what you're saying is that that last sin that brought that last curse in the life of Noah is the very first step that God has to take to restore us. So that last sin is the very first step that God has to take to restore us. So over here, we're going to have to deal with racism. So when 1798 came, we had to deal with the issue of slavery. And now we are on this path of restoration. So we have to deal, so if we say here, we're dealing with sexism, and we say here we're dealing with racism, my question and what we're trying to understand is, what is this second step? What is this second sin? Anybody? What was that second sin, and what was it a result of? This second sin.
Worship?
Worship, yes. So we say worship, we can put it as Sabbath. And who brought this? What was this sin as a result of? Or who? If we can put someone there.
Jonathan says Cain.
Okay, we'll put Cain. So in the book of Genesis, we have Eve, Cain, and Ham. And what was the sin of Cain? The sin of Cain was, he says, I want to worship God the way I want to worship God. It doesn't really matter. I want to worship God the way I want to worship God. And Patriarchs and Prophets 80.3, I'll put it up here. Patriarchs and Prophets 80.3. I'll just read the last part. Oh, you know what? Let me just read the whole part. It says, before the fall, our first parents had kept the Sabbath, which was instituted in Eden. And after their expulsion from paradise, they continued its observance. They had tasted the bitter fruits of disobedience and had learned that what everyone that tramples upon God's commandments will sooner or later learn, that the divine precepts are sacred and immutable, and that the penalty of transgression will surely be inflicted. The Sabbath was honored by all, the children of Adam that remained loyal to God, but Cain and his descendants did not respect the day upon which God had rested. They chose their own time for labor and for rest, regardless of Jehovah's express command. So we know Cain's children, they did not follow through to honor God with what God wanted with regard to how to be worshipped. And their children continued in that defiance. His children continued in that defiance. And they're described in Romans 1:21 that they fixed their minds upon worldly prosperity and enjoyment and neglected the commandments of the Lord. Men did not like to retain God in their knowledge. They became vain in their imagination and their foolish heart was darkened. Verse 28, therefore God gave them over to a mind void of judgment. And Patriarchs and Prophets 81:2 says, sin spread abroad in the earth like a deadly leprosy. So now this is the sin of Cain that led to the flood. So how do we relate this sin of Cain that led to the flood, this not wanting to follow what God is saying, to what we were talking about before, to the 1260 years?
You know, Douglas, to me, there's an overarching theme of idolatry, like the sexism and equality that you have beginning there with Eve, the Sabbath and worship beginning with Cain. And that was a very important sentence. They, Cain and his descendants, chose their own time. You know, putting ourselves above God. And Ham, racism and nationalism is still a form of idolatry because it's selfishness, idolatry, man above God instead of God above man. So, sorry, I didn't answer your question, how it relates to the Protestantism of the 1260. But that was the thought I had.
Okay, I asked the question wrongly, how it relates to the history of the 1260. You know, the Protestantism comes there to protest that form of worship that was going on in the 1260. So in the 1260, we have the same spirit that says, why do I have to worship God the way God says? I'm going to worship God the way I want. Sister Isabel says, false worship, mix of truth and error, concept of all I have is yours form, and all that I am is mine, spirit, from Claudia. Oh, that's from Claudia. Yes, so that is the same form. So we're saying we had sexism, we had the Sabbath, we had racism in the degeneration. So the 3 steps to restoration is racism, and then after racism, we know it will go to the Sabbath. Can we put a date to that? The Sabbath would say it's 1888. So in the history of 1888, we had, in the history of 1888, we had the issue of Sabbath dealt with. So when we talk about sexism, we understand that God did not institute it. It was not God's doing for sexism to come. It's part of a curse. When we talk about racism or nationalism, we know that God did not institute it. And when we talk about this issue of the violation of the Sabbath, we know that it was the doing of man. So God is undoing these 3 steps, sexism, Sabbath, and racism. He's undoing it in our time. So we know that our history, the history of Seventh-day Adventism from 1798, we undid the sin of Ham through God's grace, that the issue of slavery was brought to the forefront, and every man was, at some point actually people had to vote. So what we can conclude is that for the Millerite history, their test was racism. And when we come to the 1888 history, we can conclude that their test was worship, or the Sabbath, when the Sunday law issue was agitated. So now we're trying to understand in our time, and our time, say we began in 1989. In 1989, then we're trying to understand our time. What is the sin? What is the testing issue? What is the testing issue in our time? And if we follow this structure, then we know that in our time, it will be the issue of sexism. So now that we've laid this all out like this, we have to confront ourselves. Just the same way I was confronted with the issue of vaccinations, that I have to make a decision that do I believe this to be true and follow through with my belief. So the problem in many people's minds, whether they're in Adventism or in this movement, the problem is that we love sin. We love sin, and what comes from sin? The result of sin. And if we love the result of sin, God cannot take us to heaven. Because if he takes us to heaven, the word of God that says that iniquity shall not abound another time will not be true, because sin would arise in heaven if God were to take us to heaven. So in the time during the end of ancient Israel, Jesus said to his disciples, I have many things to tell you, but you cannot bear them all. So what we have to understand in this day and age that we are living in the end of modern Israel is that what they could not understand, what they could not bear to hear, we are required to hear. What Jesus did not dare to say during that time, this movement, we are required to hear, we are required to speak. So, you know, when Paul says that Jesus will not come until the man of sin is revealed, we know that even for us, if you're following this structure, is that the second advent would not come until these steps have been taken. And we see the first step about racism has been taken, Sabbath, and now we have to deal with the issue of sexism. And the issue of sexism is the issue that began in the Garden of Eden. So that should tell us how close we are to Jesus coming back. So just like Eve, her eyes were opened to understand the difference between good and evil. So our eyes also have to be opened so that we can understand what is good and what is evil. Is patriarchy good? Is a dowry good? What about our culture? Our culture says this and that, and we, is that good? Our eyes need to be opened so that we can understand what's the difference between good and evil. We need to understand what are the issues that we are facing in our movement today.
Douglas, I'd be interested perhaps to ask a question, if I may, to hear your thoughts or any others.
Yes, please. Thank you.
On the 1989 onwards test, sexism, I'm gathering we understand that the LGBTQ is a part of that. And my question would be, following the chiasm, would it be correct to interpret that at the beginning, there also was the issue that crept in of sexism, including the LGBTQ at that point, whereas some maybe would think, oh, it's just a modern phenomenon. But as with the profession of prostitution and different things, I mean, God indicates that there's nothing new under the sun and everything has existed from the beginning of time within reason. So my question quickly is, LGBTQ from the beginning, that was something that got like people, not by choice, but the way they're born and etc., being LGBTQ, same-sex attracted, has been there from the entrance of sin, like from the beginning. Am I correct in sort of following that through that way, matching up the chiasm, or any thoughts?
Maybe before someone speaks, when I was doing this study, I asked myself that question because I was looking to see where it fits inside here. And the study talks about it a little bit later on. But I was trying to find out, in history, can we point out the way we can point out racism, the way we can point out the issue of worship? Can we point out the issue of LGBTQ in these 3 steps of restoration, or like part of the sin or the curse that was a result of sin back in the day? But the study does talk about it. So let me just get into it, and then we'll get to that question in a little bit. So the underlying test of the Omega history is not racism. It is not Black Lives Matter. Thank you, Sister Debbie. Thank you. It's not Black Lives Matter. The test of the Sunday law will not be about racism. That one was done almost 170 years ago. The issue in our dispensation, the center of our issue is not racism. It's also not the sin of the Sabbath. The center of our issue is the sin of Adam and Eve. Like we have to go virtually to the beginning. And that's why we should not, or we are not going to stop talking about gender. Gender is the Sunday law issue. Now we all know how the beginning, this is the chiasm, the beginning and the end is. The beginning shows you how the end is going to look like. When we come to our Alpha history, the issue is racism. That is for Adventism. for Adventism, the issue is racism. But even during this time when it's our Alpha history, 1798 time period, God was still poking on the issue of racism, putting up Ellen White, Sister Ellen White, for the first time, God using a woman in that kind of role. For the first time, we have inspiration, written inspiration from the hand of a woman. And when we come prior to our history in 1989, we see three movements. This is 1989, and we see three movements. And the first one is, so we have 1, 2, and 3. And the first one is a civil rights movement. Then we have a second wave feminism. And we have LGBTQ. Stonewall. So the issues of gender were in our Alpha histories. So just to be clear that the issue of race is also in our Omega history. They're saying that we still have, there's still racism, and like it's part of the equality. The way we understand the issue during the Sunday law is equality. Racism is also inside there. So it still exists externally and internally. But the test that divides the people of God in the time of the end, it won't be racism. In essence, if people are still keeping Sunday, when they know better, God will just move on without them. If people are still racist, God will just move on without them. This is not to ignore the consistent issue of nationalism, because nationalism became an issue in this movement when we started introducing the subject of gender. So I can say I'm not racist, right? I can say that, for example, I can say I'm not racist, I don't discriminate. But when the issue of gender is introduced, now all of a sudden you start to see the patriarchy side of me, being an African, and in the African mindset, the woman has no place. So then this issue of nationalism and culture starts coming out. But what about LGBTQ? Where is that coming into this story? At what point is it coming into this story? If we consider this history, we can say the issue of feminism and LGBTQ, this is an issue of gender. Feminism and LGBTQ. And we can tie it all the way back to Eden. We can tie this all the way back to Eden. So what we are saying, or what we want to understand from this study, the way it was presented, is that sexism is broader than we realize. That's number one. Number two, that LGBTQ is rooted in gender stereotypes. So say if you have a man and a man, what roles are they meant to fit into a family? So when we say for the issue that was dealt with during the Alpha of Adventism is racism, and the issue that is being dealt with at the Omega is sexism, we need to understand that sexism encompasses not just the likes of women, it encompasses all the questions related to LGBTQ. So so let's go back and answer Sister Debbie's question. Sister Debbie's question is, where does LGBTQ come into this story? Where does it come into this story? And we say it comes in right at the beginning, when if you are not anything like a man, you are anything else, then you don't deserve. You have to submit. You don't have a place. You're not equal. And it comes right here. That's what we are saying, that LGBTQ is rooted in gender stereotype. That if you are anything different than what a man is, then you do not deserve. So it is tied in right there.
Douglas, just a thought, if I may, which precludes that Adam and Eve, even though they, on the surface, it appears like it's binary sexes, doesn't indicate that that is the full picture. But certainly Adam and Eve and their children, likely amongst their offspring, there would have been, I'll just say, same-sex attracted people born, perhaps. And I know one of the, actually a friend of mine who is same-sex attracted pointed out at one point, we got talking about the sanctuary, the building of the sanctuary, and even later the temple, but I mean, in Old Testament times. And the artisans and the workmen and so on involved, he was just making the point that, not to be stereotypical about it, but many times people who are very artistic or musical or just a variety of talents and gifts, very creative. Sometimes people who are same-sex attracted fall into a more creative mindset, like a very artistic brain. And so, and again, not to be stereotypical or to generalize too much, but I'm just wondering if it could be supposed that Adam and Eve perhaps would have had offspring that were LGBTQ.
Yeah, thank you, Sister Debbie. It ties into that statement that Jesus said, that I have much to tell you, some that you are not ready to bear. And you're telling this to his disciples. But what we are saying is that because we are the generation that's living before Jesus comes, when this issue of sexism is being sorted out, we are that generation that have to be able to bear those things, to understand those things, that Jesus may open them even more to our understanding, that we can speak about them and we can stand on them. So my prayer is that we may keep our minds open to let Jesus teach us and open to us these things, so that, as he said, that sexism is broader than we realize, that we will be able to understand it even more and to be able to relate it, to bring it back, to understand even when Adam and Eve came, how was it like? And I would not oppose to that idea that you are sharing, Sister Debbie.
And in a way, Douglas, Jesus was attempting to teach his disciples. His treatment of Mary Magdalene speaks powerfully on the side of women's rights and sexism and how he saw things. And were they able to handle that? Not really. And so LGBTQ would have been another step beyond that, just as Jesus is working with us, getting our minds step by step by step restored. And so he's having to, as you said earlier, he's having to hold back. He did with them. He had to hold back things he wanted to share with them. With us, this is a line of success. So he's going full bore. And as you said, either we'll go along and walk forward, or we'll drop off and God will keep going regardless, because he's playing for keeps now.
Yeah, so just to tie it in as we finish, even with the issue of rebaptism, the way we were talking about, we need to understand what is the issue or the question in the movement, like what is the central issue, what is at the center of the issue that we have to deal with in our dispensation. And what we are saying, that it's sexism, and it's sexism, and it's sexism. Yes, we understand that it's equality. You know, we have to treat people the way God intended, that we are all equal in the eyes of God. But the one that God wants us to sort out, which he's going to use to, or he's using to divide his people, to know who's on which side and who's on which side, is the issue of sexism. And the last time I presented, I did a presentation about patriarchy, and I presented saying that it is so intertwined in our beings that we have to pray to God to help us, so that we may not have even an inkling of in our minds of thinking, like of having those thoughts, or where like sometimes we even do it subconsciously, the way we act, the way we treat as men, the way we treat women, and even on the other side, as women who have bought into this idea of sexism, and they teach other women that you have to take this position. So I pray that God may help us to have an open mind. I just want to finish with a story that was shared on the media broadcast about Yazidi women, which I found very sad. The Yazidi religion is quite unique, and is considered one of the oldest religions in the world. And what happened is when they had the ISIS fighters going through those regions where the Yazidi religion was, they would capture women, and these women would be used as comfort women, they were called, for the fighters. So the fighters would use them and abuse them however they want, and they ended up having children with them, and it was a lot of women. So eventually, when ISIS was defeated, they had these women, they had to be integrated back into the communities. But the Yazidi, they do not take converts. You're born into it, so you cannot be converted into their religion. So they would, and the belief is that if you're a Yazidi woman, where if you get a child, that child is born into the religion of the father. So these women were told, yes, you can come, we'll take you back into our community, but you have to accept either to give these children away, or if you cannot give them away, you bring them and then we are going to kill them. And a lot of these women could not believe or take that. They were like, how can I give up my child? You know, I carried them for 9 months. I've been with them all through thick and thin. It doesn't matter then how they came into the world, but they are a human being, right? And I think it's going on still where they're trying to find homes for them in the world. But even as they're trying to find homes for them, like where are they going to take the majority of the places in the world? France, talk about Germany, some of the places, they are becoming more far right, you know? So they have to try and find other places to take them. So like this is just one story that like brings to light the struggle that is going on with women. I don't know if there's anyone else who wants to speak to this or who has had more like research on this, like on this topic. Yes, I see Sister Debbie saying Yazidi women, mothers were really tested, but so were all the rest of their community, especially women. Sister Debbie, can you speak to this?
What I've come to recognize over the years is God always tests both sides in any particular situation. And I was just observing, as you were saying, Brother Douglas, that they were, the women themselves give up their children, or, you know, like they were really being tested in a very close way, in a sense. And because, as even the Bible describes, the mother's love is one of the most powerful loves in the world. But at the same time, God was testing the remainder of the whole community, the Yazidi faith and all the leaders in the community and so on. They all were being tested. Were they going to, I'll say, bend their rules, their customs, given the circumstances, or not? And of course, the thing was not. But so God often tests both sides of any issue. He allows a situation to exist, and in that process, he's testing responses and reactions on both sides. So he does it in a multiplicity of testing.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for the comment. I don't know if anybody else has something. I think I've come to the end of the presentation. Is there anyone else who has something to add or to take away? You can take away too. Do you have a question? Thank you.
So what gender should we ascribe ourselves?
Yes, so sister, so Daniela is asking, what gender should we ascribe ourselves?
Or no gender? I don't know. I'm just wondering.
They.
Anybody? Is asking, what gender should we ascribe ourselves?
Are you asking what pronoun?
What gender?
I mean, there's only two genders. It's male or female. So primarily, everything else is a variation, permutation of that. So you're either man or you're either woman. and we will refer to you as he or she. I mean, I suppose in English that's what it's called. Yes, but so what I'm saying is, based on the basic or foundational genders that we know, we refer to them as he or she, and for any other, sorry, I'm going somewhere, for any other persons who would not be referred to as he or she, then they choose what they want to be called, and we can refer to them as that. So not to make it too complicated, right? Just saying, like, because I don't know if in other cultures they have more than he or she. So he or she is the we use those pronouns because we are speaking English, and I don't want to limit it just to the English language. Maybe in other languages is other things, but based on the English language, it would be then the he or the she and they and or whatever else. So, but yeah. So.
Daniela, I don't know if you're asking like for yourself. Like when my students ask me what my pronouns are, I say she, her, like, so I think you're okay with identifying yourself as a female. I think, but it is good to not assume that everyone wants to have their pronouns, like just to ask, right? Like for other people. Is that what you're asking, Danielle? No?
Yes, you know, because, okay, this is how I understand in general, the LGBTQ community, they do not, they are not ascribing themselves to some particular gender, or they're against the gender that has been ascribed to them by, you know, birth. So so far I feel like gender is like, looking at gender roles and, you know, everything about gender is not a good thing. Like, we should have some kind of freedom, like there should be some freedom in everybody. So I don't know if you're getting what I'm saying, but I can, so my thing is, would it be okay for me to, because when I say I'm female, I'm giving myself a role in gender. I don't know if it's making sense. And so what is that going to, like, what's the effects of that to the other person? I don't know if it made sense.
I know what you're saying. Gender is social construction. So what you think or understand a female to be is a construction that you have either done yourself or you've seen all through your life, through your mom, your sisters, your grandmother, and the way men look at and say, this is what a female should be. So that has affected your understanding of who a female is, how a female should be, what role she should play. And this is how, so that anything that is not like that is not a female.
From what I understand, gender is not a social construct, but gender roles are. So gender roles came as a cultural influence based on what the genders are supposed to be. Genders exist, and it used to be binary. There used to be two, male and female. But then we realized that there's a spectrum. And the last I've heard, there was like, 70 or 80 different gender types. So these are people that identify differently, and it's based off a lot of different things. But I don't think that those are constructs. I think that this is science discovering that there are different types of people. But the roles that we attribute to these things are based off of culture and history and the patriarchal system and all of those things. So I think we have to be sure to keep those two separate, because gender is not the construct, but the roles are a construct.
Okay. So in other
Then-
words, gender roles are something bad, like it's negative. We should not think of gender roles in our lives, in our day-to-day. Like that is something
Right.
we should be against.
Yeah, we shouldn't assume that, you know, because someone is a female that they're going to want to have a family and raise kids, or, you know, the typical things. We shouldn't assume anything in that regard about anyone. And I think that's what you're saying. Like, those are the roles that if we assume, if someone wants to tell you that, you know, if she's a female and she wants to say that she wants to raise a kid, that's her as an individual who wants to do that, right? Everyone is an individual.
Mhm.
And Daniela, I was just going to add to what Jonathan said. You said a very good, important point, I think, earlier, and that is everyone should be able to choose. You put it in some words to that effect. And I think that is where the bottom line comes, that all of us, like roles, duties, offices, you know, who washes the dishes, who balances the checkbook, da 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 da. You know, there are things that need to be done, that it doesn't devolve to any one gender to take that on as their role. They can choose, as opposed to how we label one another, how people label themselves, what pronouns they want to use, all of those things. People are allowed to decide for themselves, and the empathetic heart would respond respectfully and honor, you know, if somebody wanted to be referred to as they or him or her, or, you know, whatever, that we'll listen to them and act accordingly with respect, and that treating our neighbor as we ourselves want to be treated kind of mindset.
I was, I know Brother Jonathan said that gender is not socially constructed. Gender is who you are, and you're either male or female. Maybe I understood it wrongly. And I've seen some discussion online with regards to some people saying gender is socially constructed, while some say gender is not socially constructed. And it can get a little bit confusing, but this is the kind of discussion that we need to have for us to actually understand what sexism is all about, or how it affects us. What I'm trying to understand is when we say sex and gender, are we talking about the same thing? Because for me, it looks like we're talking about two different things. Your biological sex can be female, but when we refer to you as a female with regard to gender, then we are putting on these characteristics of how this sex should behave, or how this sex should be. So that's why now when we get to where we are now in this dispensation, there is this push for any individual to be free to identify what gender they see fit. Like, you cannot put on them and say, oh, because you look like this is your gender, or this is who you are. That's where I'm trying to understand, especially with regards to, is it socially constructed? And if it is, then how and why are they constructing these gender roles, and when did it start? Yeah. Okay, I see Brother Jonathan is saying that, yeah, there could be some confusion like about gender and sex, and gender is fluid and sex is static. You're born either a male or a female, or you're born either with male parts biologically or as a female biologically, and then we get into this spectrum of what gender is going to be ascribed to you, or you're going to ascribe to yourself, something like that. It's fluid, and we have to be open to understand it some more.
It's interesting. Dictionary.com defines gender, and I'm not sure if it would have been there this same way years back, but noun, either of the two sexes, male and female, especially when considered with reference to social and cultural differences rather than biological ones. The term is also used more broadly to denote a range of identities that do not correspond to established ideas of male and female. And then it goes on to discuss in grammar how different words in different languages, Latin and French and the Germanic languages, etc., they'll have gender attached, male, female, common, neuter, those kinds of things. So, which alludes back to Elder Tessa's article that she posted on the French language.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a whole discussion online on this issue, and I know that there's a push to believe and to understand it even more. So my prayer is that we may be part of that discussion. Thank you, Brother Jonathan. Brother Jonathan is sharing that there's different terms like gender expression and gender identity too, that add to the mix, and it helps to identify all those terms, because this is something that we are dealing with now, something that's we would consider new, because we are breaking away from how. Thank you, Brother Jonathan, for sharing that. We are dealing with it now, and we need to be open to understand it some more. But I want to thank each and everybody for participating, and I hope that we were able to get something out of this study. It was done by Sister Tess, and she presented very nicely. I really enjoyed it, Elder Tess, and I really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to more. But God bless you. If no one has anything else, anyone has anything else before we pray? All right. Okay, let's pray. Our kind and loving Father, who art in heaven, thank you so much for the opportunity you've given us to look into your words, to learn and to understand what is the issue that is going to be the testing question at the end of time. And now that we've been able to narrow it down to understand that the issue is about gender, it's about equality. And we, even in our small discussion, we've come to understand that we have different thoughts, and we do not understand as we ought to. So we pray that you may lead us and you may guide us, that we may be able to understand, we may be able to know what it is that we believe, and that that when we know, then we may choose to stand and to be counted among those who are following you and following your truth. May your name be glorified and forevermore. Be with each and everyone who's here. More importantly, be with our parents and our siblings, wherever they are. We commit them unto your hands this Sabbath. And we pray that you may continue to bless them and meet them at their point of needs today. We ask all this believing and trusting in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Doug.